It's June 8th, 1966, just after midnight, and the Beverly Hills Hotel is still glowing with that golden, timeless elegance that only money and power can create. The Polo Lounge sits like a jewel inside the hotel, dimly lit, intimate, draped in the kind of sophistication that makes ordinary people feel ordinary and extraordinary people feel invincible. The booths are large, the drinks are flowing, and the air smells like expensive cologne and old money. Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin have just arrived. Sinatra is 50 years old, still commanding attention in any room, still the chairman of the board, still a man whose snap of fingers could change the direction of careers. But something is shifting in the world. The Beatles are on the radio. Rock and roll is taking over. The crooner era, Sinatra's era, feels like it's slipping away. Nobody wants to talk about that tonight, though. Tonight is about celebrating. Tonight is Dean Martin's 49th birthday, and they're going to celebrate in style. With them is Jilly Rizzo, Sinatra's closest friend and right-hand man. Jilly is a burly man, barrel-chested, with a glass eye that people whisper about in bars and restaurants. He owns Jilly's Saloon back in New York, a place where celebrities congregate and deals are made. Jilly speaks in that New York accent, desse, dems and dos, and he watches everyone around Sinatra like a hawk. He's protective, he's loyal, he's dangerous if he needs to be. With them also is Richard Conte, an actor, a Jersey native just like Sinatra and Dean. Conte has been in movies with both of them. He knows the world they move in. He knows what it means to be part of the Rat Pack, even on the periphery. He knows the rules of their world, and that the most important rule is that they don't answer to anyone. And then there are three women whose names are lost to history. They're there to celebrate, to laugh, to be part of the moment. They're part of the scene, part of the backdrop, to powerful men doing powerful men things. The booth they're in isn't just any booth. On the table sits a pink telephone. In the Polo Lounge in 1966, these pink phones aren't whimsical decorations. They're symbols. They're weapons. They're proof that you belong to an elite circle. When you're sitting at a table with a pink telephone, you have power. You can call studios, you can call lawyers, you can call governors, you can make things happen. The pink telephone says, "This table belongs to someone important." Sinatra's party is loud. They're celebratory. The drinks are coming fast, scotch, champagne, whatever they want. The laughter is genuine. But it's also the kind of laughter that announces itself, that makes sure everyone else in the room knows that the important people are having a better time than they are. The conversation is colorful. Very colorful. The kind of language that would make a priest blush is flowing as liberally as the liquor. About 20 minutes before the Polo Lounge is supposed to close, two men walk in. One of them is Frederick Rand Weissman. He's 54 years old, a self-made millionaire. He started selling produce wholesale, built that into something, and eventually became the president of Hunt Foods. Now, by 1966, he's moved beyond food. He's invested in uranium. He's investing in art. He's collecting paintings and sculptures from the greatest artists in the world. He's a man of refinement. He's a man of taste. He's a man of quiet power. With him is Franklin H. Fox, an elderly gentleman from Boston, in his mid-70s, who runs a furniture company. The two men are there for a nightcap. They've just come from dinner. There's a wedding coming up. Fox's daughter is marrying Weissman's son. These are businessmen, successful men, men accustomed to respect and quiet conversation. The two booths are adjacent to each other. Weissman and Fox settle in and try to talk, trying to enjoy their nightcap in the quiet sophistication of the Polo Lounge. But the noise from Sinatra's table is overwhelming. They can barely hear each other. The language is getting louder. The celebration is getting more raucous. After about 10 minutes of this, Weissman reaches the end of his patience. He leans over toward the pink telephone booth where Sinatra and Martin are sitting. He's not aggressive. He's not confrontational. He's just a businessman, trying to have a quiet conversation in a place he's paying to be in. He says something to the effect of, "You're talking too loud. The language is inappropriate. There are ladies present." Now, if you know anything about Frank Sinatra in 1966, you know that Frank Sinatra doesn't respond well to criticism. Frank Sinatra doesn't respond well to being told what to do. Frank Sinatra, in that moment, is a 50-year-old man, watching his era fade, watching younger men become more relevant, watching his power slip just a little bit every single day. Someone telling him to lower his voice is like someone telling him that his time is over. What Sinatra says back to Wiseman is testy. It's sharp. It's designed to put Wiseman in his place. The exact words are contested by history. Different people remember it different ways. Some say Sinatra responded with an insulting quip about Wiseman's prominence. Some say there was an ethnic slur involved. Some say he made a crack about the businessman's glasses. The details blur. The way details always blur when powerful men start pushing against each other. What happens next is also contested by history. The truth is murkier than anyone would like to admit. According to one account, Sinatra's own account, Wiseman suddenly threw a punch at him, right in the eye. Sinatra says it caught him hard, fast, unexpected. And then, Sinatra claims, Wiseman slipped. He just fell to the floor on his own. He crashed into a cocktail table and broke it. Nobody touched him. He just fell. According to another account, one that came from Franklin H. Fox decades later, it went differently. Fox says Sinatra made that ethnic slur, made that crack about the glasses, and then Sinatra stormed out of the lounge in a rage, leaving Wiseman sitting there, humiliated. But Sinatra didn't stay gone for long. Minutes later, he came back. He came back hot. He came back angry. He came back ready for a fight. Both accounts agree on one thing. Dean Martin was trying to stop it. Dean Martin, the birthday boy, the reason they're here, is standing between them, pleading. His voice is calm, urgent. Let's get out of here, Frank. Let's get out of here. The booth is chaos now. There's grabbing, there's pushing, there's the sound of violence starting to happen in slow motion, and then someone grabs the pink telephone. The symbol of power becomes a weapon. The accounts differ on who grabbed it. Some say it was Sinatra. Some say it was Jilly Rizzo, Sinatra's right-hand man, the burly protector. But whoever grabbed it, whatever happened in the next seconds, Frederick Wiseman ends up on the floor of the Polo Lounge unconscious. His head is bleeding. The phone is in his hand, or near his hand, or it's on the floor somewhere covered in blood. The symbol of power has left a mark, literally. When the dust settles, when security finally separates the men, when the chaos of the moment becomes the aftermath, the damage is done. Dean Martin has a black eye. Frank Sinatra has a black eye, and his arm will be in a sling later. Frederick Wiseman is bleeding, unconscious, and nobody's moving to help him immediately. Security moves Sinatra and his party out of the lounge fast. Richard Conte is gone. Jilly Rizzo is gone. The three women are gone. The birthday party has ended. The pink telephone sits on the table, maybe wiped clean, maybe still smeared with blood. The other guests in the Polo Lounge have learned a lesson that night. This is Frank Sinatra's world, and everyone else is just living in it. Paramedics arrive 11 minutes after the incident. They find Frederick Wiseman still unconscious on the floor, surrounded by broken glass, overturned furniture, the wreckage of a moment that nobody should have seen. His pulse is weak, his breathing is shallow. His pupils are different sizes, a sign that something serious has happened inside his skull. They rush him to Cedars-Sinai Hospital. Initial examination suggests he has a concussion, nothing more. So they treat him. They revive him enough. They send him home. They put him in bed. The night ends. But the night doesn't really end. Not for Frederick Wiseman. Almost 24 hours later, Wiseman still hasn't woken up properly. His wife realizes something is wrong. Seriously wrong. She calls for help. Paramedics come back. This time they take him straight to Mount Sinai Hospital, straight to the intensive care unit. This time the doctors see what they missed the first time. Severe head trauma. Skull fracture. Brain injury. The telephone blow, or whatever blow fractured his skull, has done damage that a few hours of rest can't fix. Wiseman is rushed into surgery. The operation lasts 2.5 hours. Surgeons work to relieve the swelling, to stop the bleeding, to save his life. When they finish, Frederick Weissman is alive, but he's unconscious. He's in critical condition. The doctors cannot guarantee that he will survive. The doctors cannot guarantee that if he does survive, he will be the same person. Meanwhile, Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin are getting ready to flee. Beverly Hills Police Chief Clinton Anderson has launched a full-scale investigation. He's ordered detectives to round up everyone who was in that lounge that night. He's ordered them to find out exactly what happened. And Anderson, a man who knows Frank Sinatra personally, who has coordinated security for President Kennedy when JFK came to the Beverly Hills area, a man who is accustomed to dealing with the most powerful people in Los Angeles, Anderson has a problem. His problem is that Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin have left town. They've gone to Burbank Airport. They've gotten on a plane. They're leaving. And now, whether Anderson charges them or not, whether there's an investigation or not, it looks like they're guilty of fleeing the scene. The investigation starts trying to piece together what happened. But the witnesses can't agree. Some saw Weissman get punched. Some saw him fall on his own. Some think Sinatra did it. Some think Jilly Rizzo did it. Some think it was someone else entirely. Nobody's story is completely consistent. Nobody's memory is perfect. And as the hours pass, as the statements get taken and retaken, as lawyers start getting involved on both sides, the truth becomes harder and harder to pin down. Police Chief Anderson tells the press that Weissman was on prescription medication that might not have mixed well with the alcohol he'd been drinking. That becomes part of the story. Maybe Weissman's condition isn't about what happened in the Polo Lounge. Maybe it's about chemistry, about prescription drugs, about alcohol combining in his body in ways that doctors didn't predict. Maybe he would have ended up in a coma anyway, pink telephone or no pink telephone. Anderson also tells the press that it's possible Sinatra is telling the truth. It's possible Weissman just fell and hit his head on the cocktail table and that's what caused the injury. It's possible nobody did this on purpose. It's possible it was an accident that spiraled into an unconscious man lying on the floor of the most exclusive bar in Beverly Hills. No charges are filed. Not against Sinatra. Not against Martin. Not against Jilly Rizzo. Not against anyone. Frederick Weissman, meanwhile, is lying in Mount Sinai Hospital fighting for his life. He's unconscious. He doesn't recognize his wife when she comes to visit him. He doesn't know where he is or what day it is. Days pass and he remains in this state, locked somewhere between life and a deeper darkness. And then, according to one account that's been told and retold, an account that's become almost legendary in Hollywood, his wife brings something to the hospital. She brings one of their paintings. She brings a drawing by Jackson Pollock, one of the greatest artists of the 20th century. She knows it's his favorite. She knows that this drawing means something to him. She brings it to his bedside. And Frederick Weissman sees it. Something in his brain, something in the part of him that was still there, still fighting, still alive, responds. He looks at the Jackson Pollock drawing and something clicks. He sits up. He says, "Jackson Pollock. I remember when we bought that." He wakes up. Not all the way. Not completely. But enough. He's alive. He's conscious. He's going to survive. It takes time. Weeks of recovery. Months of rehabilitation. But Frederick Weissman, the man who was nearly killed in the Polo Lounge on Dean Martin's 49th birthday, the man who dared to tell Frank Sinatra to lower his voice, survives. He goes on to become one of the greatest art collectors of his generation. He founds museums. He donates his collection to universities. He becomes a philanthropist. He lives another 28 years. Until 1994. That drawing, that Jackson Pollock drawing that his wife brought to the hospital, it becomes part of the story. It becomes the thing that saved him. It becomes the redemption arc in a story that starts with blood and violence and the terrible certainty that a man might not wake up. But in the immediate aftermath, none of that matters yet. What matters is the silence. The press gets the basics. A fight at the Beverly Hills Hotel. 2 celebrities involved. A businessman injured. Police investigation. But the details get murky. The story gets managed. Beverly Hills Police Chief Anderson is friendly with Frank Sinatra. Mickey Rudin, Sinatra's lawyer, is very good at his job. The Rat Pack has power, and power in 1966 Los Angeles means that some stories don't get the full telling. Some stories get edited. Some stories get explained away. Nobody's charged, nobody's prosecuted, nobody's held accountable. And Frederick Wiseman, still recovering in his hospital bed, can't remember what happened. The skull fracture, the brain injury, the coma. It's erased some of his memory of that night. He doesn't remember the confrontation. He doesn't remember who hit him, or how he fell. He just remembers waking up in a hospital. Within hours of Frederick Wiseman being rushed to Mount Sinai Hospital, Mickey Rudin was already making phone calls. Rudin was no ordinary lawyer. For the next 33 years, he would be Sinatra's closest confidant, his consigliere, the man who cleaned up messes and made problems vanish. In 1966, Rudin was already well established as the kind of attorney who understood that the law is one thing, but power and connections are something else entirely. Rudin had connections everywhere. He knew judges, he knew politicians, he knew police chiefs, and more importantly, he knew how to make stories disappear. The Polo Lounge was a problem for everyone involved. The hotel couldn't have a scandal. Sinatra couldn't have charges. Martin couldn't have his name dragged through the courts. The restaurant staff couldn't have to testify against famous entertainers. And Beverly Hills Police Chief Clinton Anderson, a man who had coordinated security for President Kennedy when JFK came to town, a man who had a working relationship with Frank Sinatra, Anderson had a very specific problem. He had to at least appear to be investigating, but he couldn't actually let this case go anywhere. So what happened was what always happened in Beverly Hills in 1966. The compensation started flowing. Sinatra's publicist began the process of managing the narrative. Waiters at the Polo Lounge suddenly became less certain about what they had seen. Security guards weren't quite sure who had hit whom. Witnesses developed convenient amnesia. And rumors, unconfirmed rumors that would never be proven but would be whispered about forever, suggested that the Wiseman family had received a very substantial settlement in exchange for their decision not to press charges. The exact amount of money involved? That's something that's been lost to history. Or more accurately, it's something that was lost to discretion. Nobody talks about it. The Wiseman family never confirmed it. Sinatra's estate never acknowledged it. But everyone in that world knew. Everyone understood that when a powerful man could be connected to a near-fatal beating in one of the most exclusive restaurants in Beverly Hills, and nobody ended up in court, money had changed hands. By the time the investigation was officially closed, the narrative had been firmly established. Frederick Wiseman's medical condition was complicated. He had been on prescription medication. He had been drinking. Perhaps the medication and alcohol had interacted in unexpected ways. Perhaps his fall, whether he fell on his own or was pushed, was simply an accident. Perhaps the whole thing was a tragedy rather than a crime. And in that gray area between tragedy and crime, between accident and assault, the case was allowed to die quietly. No charges, no prosecution, no trial. Just a businessman recovering in a hospital bed, his memory still fuzzy about how he ended up there, slowly rebuilding his life, while the two entertainers who had left him bleeding on the Polo Lounge floor went about their careers. But here's where the story gets really interesting. Because the incident didn't just disappear. It festered. It infected the relationship between Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin in ways that neither man could have predicted on that June night in 1966. 3 months after the incident, Frank Sinatra married Mia Farrow. She was 21 years old. He was 50 years old. The wedding was in July 1966, and it was one of the most controversial celebrity marriages of the decade. For a man who was supposedly celebrating his best friend's birthday, Sinatra seemed to have a lot of other things on his mind. A new marriage. A declining recording career. An aging body that was fighting against rock and roll, and a music industry that no longer seemed to care about crooners. A personal life that was beginning to feel chaotic and out of control. And right there, at the exact same moment that Sinatra was trying to start his new life with a woman 30 years his junior, Dean Martin was on his way to becoming the most important entertainer in America. The Dean Martin Show had premiered in September 1965. By the second season, the season that started just as the Polo Lounge incident was being quietly settled, the show was ranked number 14 in America. By the third season, it was number 8. By the fourth season, it was still number 8. And the numbers tell the story that nothing can change. 30 million people were watching Dean Martin every Thursday night on their televisions. 30 million people laughed at his jokes. 30 million people listened to him sing. 30 million people made him, week after week, the most visible entertainer in America. Frank Sinatra, meanwhile, was in the studio recording album after album that was selling fewer and fewer copies. By 1966, his albums were moving 8 million copies. By 1967, they were moving 6 million copies. The music industry was changing. The Beatles had remade rock and roll. The Rolling Stones were showing young people that music didn't have to be about romance and standards and crooning your feelings. It could be about revolution. It could be about sex. It could be about anger. And in that landscape, Frank Sinatra's voice, which had once been the most beautiful thing millions of people had ever heard, suddenly sounded old. Sinatra was at the creative apex of his career, the People magazine article said. But that wasn't entirely true. Sinatra was at the beginning of the decline of his career, and Dean Martin was at the beginning of his ascendancy. And somewhere in that gap between Sinatra's descent and Martin's rise, something fundamental broke between them. The thing about power and friendship is that they can coexist as long as the power is roughly equal. As long as both men are at the top, as long as both men are getting the best tables at the best restaurants, as long as both men are earning roughly the same amount of money and getting roughly the same amount of attention, they can be friends. They can celebrate together. They can laugh together. They can be brothers. But once the power becomes unequal, once one man is ascending and the other is descending, once one man is the star of a television show watched by 30 million people and the other is a recording artist whose albums nobody's buying anymore, something toxic enters the room. Sinatra couldn't accept that. More accurately, Sinatra couldn't accept that Dean Martin was the one ascending while he was the one descending. The Polo Lounge incident, according to multiple sources, never fully healed. The public face of the Rat Pack, that brotherhood of entertainers who were supposed to be inseparable, who were supposed to be loyal to each other forever, started cracking right there, right at that moment, when the pink telephone was used as a weapon and a businessman was left bleeding on the floor. Because in that moment, something had to give. Someone had to leave. Someone had to accept that their friendship couldn't survive the damage that had been done. And Dean Martin, who had always preferred peace and quiet, who had always wanted to go home to his family and play golf and not deal with the chaos that seemed to follow Frank Sinatra everywhere, made a decision. He decided that he was going to pull away. He decided that Frank Sinatra's friendship wasn't worth the stress. The split didn't happen overnight. It wasn't like Dean Martin walked away immediately and never spoke to Sinatra again. It was slower than that. It was more painful than that. It was the kind of friendship that slowly died because two men couldn't figure out how to be happy for each other when one of them was on top and the other was slipping. The stories that came out over the years are vague. Some people said that Martin stopped returning Sinatra's phone calls. Others said that Martin made it clear he didn't want to see him anymore. Still others said that they would see each other at industry events, but the warmth was gone. The jokes didn't land the same way. The brotherhood felt forced. They were going through the motions, playing the parts that they were supposed to play, but something essential had died. And for Frank Sinatra, watching Dean Martin's television show become the most watched program on Thursday nights in America, watching Dean Martin's records sell millions of copies, watching Dean Martin laugh on television with the audience in the palm of his hand, for Frank Sinatra, it was torture. It was the kind of torture that comes from watching someone you love, someone you should be celebrating, someone who was supposed to be your brother, become more successful than you at exactly the moment when you needed to be more successful, not less. By the time the 1,970 seconds rolled around, the friendship between Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin was essentially over. They would see each other at industry events. They would work together occasionally. They would maintain the appearance of friendship because that's what professional men do. But the actual friendship, the real brotherhood that had defined their relationship since they came together in the 1950 seconds, that was gone. The Rat Pack as an institution was dying too. Sammy Davis Jr. was struggling with his own demons. Joey Bishop was being marginalized. Peter Lawford was fading, and the world was changing around all of them. The sexual revolution had happened. The civil rights movement had forced the country to reckon with racism in ways that the Rat Pack's comedy couldn't accommodate. The Vietnam War was tearing the country apart. Martin Luther King Jr. was dead. Malcolm X was dead. And the jokes that had seemed so funny in the 1950 seconds and early 1960 seconds, the jokes about drinking, the racial stereotypes, the sexism suddenly felt obscene. The Rat Pack was becoming a relic of a different era, and the incident at the Polo Lounge, the incident that had never been fully discussed or resolved, was slowly poisoning the relationships that held the group together. 22 years later, in 1988, an attempt was made to bring the magic back. Sinatra, Martin, and Sammy Davis Jr. were going to tour together. They were going to perform together one more time. They were going to remind people what they had been, back when they were young and beautiful, and the most famous entertainers in the world. The reunion tour was one of the saddest spectacles in entertainment history. Frank Sinatra was in his 70s. He was trying to be the leader, trying to be the man he had always been. But something was wrong. The voice wasn't what it used to be. The stamina wasn't there. He was desperate to reclaim something that had already been lost. Dean Martin was detached. He showed up to perform, but his heart wasn't in it. According to multiple accounts, he was drinking heavily. Witnesses said he was throwing lit cigarettes at audience members. In one show, he fell so far behind the other performers in a medley that Sinatra had to make a public joke about it. But backstage, Sinatra wasn't joking. He was furious. He threw a plate of spaghetti at Martin's head. And Sammy Davis Jr., who had spent his whole life trying to prove that he belonged in this group, who had broken barriers just by being a black man performing alongside white men at the height of segregation, Sammy was battling a cocaine addiction that was slowly killing him. The tour was supposed to be in multiple cities. It was supposed to be a triumph, a reminder of what they had been. Instead, it fell apart in Chicago. After just 6 days, Dean Martin walked out. He said he wasn't going to continue. He wasn't going to spend another night in a hotel arguing with Frank Sinatra about suites and seating arrangements and who got the best dressing room. Sinatra demanded that all three of them have suites on the same floor. Martin refused. And in that refusal, something fundamental was said. 22 years after the Polo Lounge, after all those years of distance and silence, and the unspoken understanding that they couldn't be what they had been, Dean Martin finally said it without words. "I'm done." The Rat Pack performed together one more time after that, briefly, for a charity event. But the magic was completely gone. Everyone could see it. The golden era had ended. The brotherhood was broken. And the incident at the Polo Lounge, an incident that had never been fully acknowledged, never been fully discussed, never been fully resolved, was still sitting between them, like a ghost that wouldn't leave the room. In 1990, near the end of his life, Frank Sinatra gave an interview. He was old, he was tired. He was looking back at his life with the kind of perspective that only comes when you know you're running out of time. And he talked about Dean Martin. He said something that those who were there said nearly broke him. Dean was the best of us. Not the most talented maybe, but the best. Because he never needed to prove anything. I spent my whole career trying to be the greatest. I spent my whole career fighting for position, fighting for relevance, fighting for people to pay attention to me. And it made me the kind of man that people wanted to avoid. It made me lonely. I hurt the person who should have been closest to me, because I was too busy being jealous of his success to celebrate it with him. That's not something you get over. That's not something you forgive yourself for. Whether Sinatra actually said those exact words or whether they're a construction of myth and memory, they represent something true. They represent the truth that the Polo Lounge incident, the incident that had been buried and forgotten and erased from the official record, had never actually disappeared. It had just sunk deeper and deeper into the friendship until the friendship couldn't survive it anymore. Dean Martin died in 1995. Frank Sinatra died 3 years later, in 1998. They had not reconciled. They had not found a way to go back to what they had been. The wound from that night in June 1966, the night when a pink telephone became a weapon and a businessman was left bleeding on the floor, that wound never healed. And that is the real story of the Polo Lounge incident. It's not just about what happened that night. It's about what the incident did to the men involved. It's about how a moment of violence, even when it's managed and controlled and made to disappear through lawyers and money and power, still has consequences, still changes things, still destroys relationships and breaks bonds and leaves scars that never fully heal. The pink telephone was put back on the table. Frederick Wiseman recovered. Frank Sinatra went on to record more albums. Dean Martin went on to become the most famous entertainer in America. Mickey Rudin made the investigation go away. The Polo Lounge stayed open. Beverly Hills kept its reputation. But something essential was broken that night, and it never got fixed. The brotherhood that was supposed to last forever, that was supposed to be one of the great friendships in entertainment history, ended in Beverly Hills, in an exclusive restaurant, when a businessman asked a famous singer to turn down the noise, and the singer, in his rage and his fear of irrelevance, responded with violence. That's the story that was erased from history. Not because people didn't know it happened, but because it was too painful, too shameful, too revealing of what those men really were beneath the glamour and the fame and the legend. By December 1995, Dean Martin was dying. The cancer had spread, his lungs were failing. He lay in his Beverly Hills home, struggling to breathe, his body shutting down piece by piece. And on a day just before Christmas, maybe December 11th, maybe December 12th, the exact date lost to history, Frank Sinatra called. Frank Sinatra was 68 years old by then, still alive, still relatively healthy, still trying to hold on to the life he had built. He called his old friend with something that might have been desperation in his voice. He wanted closure. He wanted comfort. He wanted Dean Martin to tell him that everything was okay, that they were okay, that the decades of distance and hurt and unspoken pain didn't matter. What he got instead was the truth. Dean Martin, lying in his bed, his lungs struggling to pull in oxygen, his body exhausted from the fight against cancer he had decided not to fight, his voice weak but his mind clear, said something to Frank Sinatra that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The exact words are contested now. Time and retelling have blurred the details, but the essential meaning has been preserved in multiple accounts. You were never my best friend, Frank. I was your audience. I was your mirror. I was the guy who made you feel less alone at the top. But I was never your equal. You never let me be. The words hung in the air between them, traveling through the telephone lines from a Beverly Hills bedroom to wherever Frank Sinatra was, probably in Los Angeles, probably alone, probably still unable to accept that his power had limits. And Frank Sinatra, who had spent his entire career refusing to accept limitations, refused to accept this too. He said something like, "What? What do you mean?" His mind couldn't process it. His worldview couldn't accommodate it. And Dean Martin, with the clarity that only comes when you know you're dying, explained it to him. He had been the supporting actor in Frank's life. He had been the vehicle for Frank's emotional needs. He had played the role of best friend, but he had never been treated like Frank's equal. When Dean had walked away from the 1988 reunion tour, when he had finally decided that his dignity was worth more than Frank Sinatra's friendship, Frank hadn't asked why. He hadn't asked if Dean was okay. He hadn't offered help. He had just felt betrayed, embarrassed, angry. And that was when Dean understood that Frank had never actually seen him, not the real him. Just the version that made Frank feel better about himself. Frank was crying now, the story goes. Openly. Without shame. Without the masculine armor that he had worn his entire life. He was saying, "I didn't know, I didn't understand. Why didn't you tell me?" And Dean Martin, his voice barely above a whisper, was saying, "Because you never asked." The final words, according to the accounts that have survived, were something like, "Be honest with the next person, Frank. See them. Really see them. Don't make them into what you need them to be. Let them be who they are." It was Dean Martin's last gift to Frank Sinatra. A lesson in how to love someone. A lesson that came far too late. The phone call lasted maybe 5 minutes. Maybe less. It was the end of 50 years of friendship. It was the end of the Rat Pack. It was the end of the era when two men could be brothers without actually being brothers. When they could share a stage and an audience and the adoration of millions without ever truly knowing each other. 2 weeks later, on Christmas Day 1995, Dean Martin died. His lungs gave out, his body surrendered. He was 78 years old. His legacy was secure. He had been an icon, a legend, a brilliant entertainer who had spent his career making people laugh and forget their problems. But the one person he wanted to truly see him had never quite managed it. Frank Sinatra did not attend the funeral. He told himself it was because he was in fragile health, which was true. He told himself it was because he didn't want to overshadow the funeral with concerns about his own condition, which may have been true. But the real reason, the reason that nobody needed to say out loud, was that Frank Sinatra couldn't face it. He couldn't face the loss of Dean Martin. He couldn't face the confirmation that he had been the cause of the distance between them. He couldn't face the reality that his best friend, if Dean had ever actually been his best friend, was gone. Instead, Sinatra released a statement. "He was my brother, my partner. He was a friend that I loved dearly, and there will never be another like him." The words were beautiful. They were also, by Dean's own definition, incomplete. Frank had loved Dean, but he had not seen him. He had not known him. He had not accepted him as an equal. And now it was too late. For the next 2.5 years, Frank Sinatra lived with that knowledge. He lived with the 5-minute conversation replaying in his head. He lived with Dean Martin's words, "You were never my best friend," echoing through his mind in the dark hours of the night. He tried to fill the time. He tried to perform. He tried to hold on to the life he had built. But something fundamental had broken inside him. By January 1997, Frank Sinatra had his first heart attack. His body was telling him what his mind already knew. He was dying. Not in the spiritual sense, but literally. His heart was failing. His kidneys were failing. His lungs were filling with fluid. His mind was starting to deteriorate. He developed dementia. He would call his daughters by his wife's name. He would stare at people blankly, unable to recognize them. The man who had once been the most brilliant, most charming, most in-control person in any room, the man who had spent his entire life commanding attention and getting his way, was slowly disappearing. By May 1998, Frank Sinatra was essentially living in bed. Round-the-clock nurses were caring for him. His wife Barbara was managing every aspect of his life. His children had to be kept at a distance, because seeing them was too painful. Seeing how far their father had fallen was too much. His publicist was telling the Las Vegas Sun in April 1998 that he was doing very well, and strong, and walking around. A statement so divorced from reality that it seemed almost cruel. But that was Frank Sinatra's final act. The performance. The lie. The maintenance of the image. Even as the body underneath was crumbling. On the 14th of May 1998, Frank Sinatra had another heart attack. Paramedics rushed him to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, the same hospital where his father had been treated, where his children had been born, where Dean Martin had gone when his lungs failed. And this time, there would be no coming home. This time, there would be no recovery. This time, the heart that had sung through more than 60 years of performances was finally going to stop beating. His wife Barbara was there. His manager Tony Appadisano was there. His nurses were there. His children were not there. Barbara had not called them. His daughter Tina would find out about her father's death from a phone call, while she was watching the final episode of Seinfeld on television, a detail so perfectly cruel that it could only be the truth. His daughters would later write that Barbara had deliberately kept them away from their father's final hospitalization, that she wanted to be the grieving widow without competition, without the messy reality of his actual family. And in those final hours, in a hospital bed surrounded by machines and tubes and the technical apparatus of modern medicine, Frank Sinatra struggled. His body was fighting against the inevitable. His lungs were gasping for air. His heart was beating irregularly, desperately, refusing to surrender. Barbara was urging him to fight. Fight, darling. You must fight. You mustn't give in. She was begging him to hold on, to keep fighting, to not abandon her the way he had abandoned so many people in his life. And Frank Sinatra looked at her, looked at Tony Appizzano, looked at the machines that were keeping him tethered to life by the thinnest of threads. And he said the most honest thing he had said in years, the most true thing, the most final thing. I'm losing. Those were Frank Sinatra's final words. Not I love you. Not I'm sorry. Not tell Dean I love him. Or tell Dean I'm sorry. Or anything that might have suggested he had learned Dean's lesson about seeing people. About loving them for who they are. Just 3 words. Quiet. Resigned. Honest. I'm losing. And with that, Frank Sinatra surrendered. His heart stopped beating. His lungs stopped trying. The voice that had defined American music, that had sung millions of people through their heartbreak and their celebrations, that had entertained presidents and paupers, that voice was silent. He was 82 years old. He had lived 2 years and almost 5 months longer than Dean Martin. He had survived his best friend. He had lived long enough to understand deeply what he had lost. And he had not been able to fix it. Not through charm, not through money, not through the power that had been the defining feature of his entire life. Some things cannot be fixed once they're broken. Some relationships cannot be repaired once they've been damaged. Some words, once they're said, cannot be unsaid. The pink telephone had been removed from the Polo Lounge long ago. The Beverly Hills Hotel still operates. Frederick Wiseman's art collection is displayed in a museum that bears his name. The wound that was inflicted on the 8th of June 1966 has become history. Hollywood has moved on to different dramas, different scandals, different tales of power and corruption and broken friendships. But the essential truth remains unchanged. Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin were brothers in the most profound sense, not by blood but by choice, by shared experience, by the understanding that they had built something together that would outlast them both. And yet, that brotherhood was built on an unequal foundation. It was built with one man commanding and the other accommodating. It was built with one man centered and the other orbiting. It was built with one man's needs mattering more than the others. And when the Polo Lounge incident forced them both to confront the power imbalance in their relationship, when a businessman's skull was fractured and the legal system was persuaded to look the other way, when the moment revealed the true nature of their friendship, they couldn't recover from it. They couldn't go back. They couldn't pretend the mask had never slipped. Instead, they spent the next 32 years slowly moving apart, growing colder, understanding with each passing year that what they had built together was fundamentally flawed. And by the time they could have fixed it, by the time they could have acknowledged the problem and addressed it, it was too late. Dean Martin was dying. Frank Sinatra was aging. The moment had passed. The last thing that connected them was a phone call in December 1995. A 5-minute conversation where Dean Martin finally told Frank Sinatra the truth, and Frank Sinatra finally heard it. And then Frank Sinatra had to live with that truth for another 887 days, had to carry the weight of it, had to understand with perfect clarity what he had lost and why he had lost it. And when his heart stopped beating on the 14th of May, 1998, he still couldn't say the words that might have mattered. Still couldn't say, I'm sorry. Still couldn't say, I loved you. Still couldn't do anything, except accept defeat. I'm losing, he whispered. And then the music stopped. The performance ended. The legend faded. If you're watching this, and you have someone in your life who matters to you, someone who has been there for you, someone who has been your mirror or your audience, or just your friend through the years, I need you to hear this. See them. Really see them. Don't make them into what you need them to be. Ask the hard questions. Listen to the answers. even when they hurt. Because there will come a day when it's too late. There will come a day when the phone call ends, and there's no opportunity for another one. So don't wait. Don't let the years pass. Don't let the distance grow. See the people you love for who they really are, and love them anyway. Because that's the only way to avoid the tragedy that defined the last 3 decades of Frank Sinatra's life. And if you found this story compelling, then please, subscribe to this channel, because we tell the stories that history tried to bury. Hit that subscribe button, and join us next time, when we uncover another untold truth. Because some stories deserve to be remembered.